They said the Duke's war horse was broken beyond saving. Too dangerous, too damaged, too far gone to ever trust again. But when the stable girl stepped into its stall without permission and began speaking in a language no one else understood, the animal that had terrorized trained handlers for months went completely still. And in that impossible quiet, as beast and woman stood face to face in the half-dark, the Duke realized that everything he thought he understood about loyalty, survival, and the walls people build around wounded hearts was about to be proven devastatingly wrong. The morning it happened, Blackmore Estate was already tense. The stallion had arrived 3 days earlier in a reinforced transport, and the household had heard nothing since except crashes, shouts, and the sound of splintering wood echoing from the stables. Duke Cashenhale had returned from the war with scars no one mentioned and silence even his closest advisors had learned not to breach. But he had also brought back Varden, the war horse that had carried him through battles no gentleman discussed in polite company. The animal was magnificent and lethal. 17 hands of black muscle and fury, eyes white-rimmed with a fear that had calcified into rage. 3 experienced handlers had already resigned. The head groom, a man who had gentled horses for 30 years, refused to enter the stall alone. The Duke himself could barely approach without the stallion rearing violently against its reinforced chains. And yet Cashen would not give the order everyone expected. He would not have the horse destroyed. Mira Ashton had been at Blackmore for 6 weeks, hired as an undergroom during the estate's desperate expansion to accommodate the Duke's return. She was small, quiet, and unremarkable in the way that made her nearly invisible among the staff. No one asked about her past. No one questioned the faint accent that occasionally colored her words. She mucked stables, hauled feed, and kept her eyes down exactly as survival required. But she noticed everything. She noticed how the Duke's jaw tightened whenever anyone suggested putting Varden down. Noticed how he stood outside the stable long after dark, hands clenched, staring toward the stall where the stallion screamed its rage into the night. Noticed the way Trauma wore the same face whether it walked on 2 legs or 4. The other grooms complained constantly. The beast possessed, one muttered. No natural horse fights like that. Another disagreed. It's frightened. You can see it in the eyes. The head groom shook his head grimly. Frightened or not, it'll kill someone. His Grace should end this before it does. Mira said nothing. But that night, she made a decision that would unravel everything. She waited until the estate slept, until even the night watch had moved to the far pastures. The stable was dark except for a single lantern burning low near the tack room. Varden's stall stood at the end, isolated from the other horses, reinforced with double bars after he'd kicked through the original door. The stallion heard her approach. His ears flattened. A low, threatening sound rumbled through his chest. Mira stopped just outside the bars, close enough to see the scars crisscrossing his flanks, the barely healed wounds from whatever hell he and the Duke had survived together. Close enough to smell fear beneath the rage. She began speaking softly, not in the common tongue, not in anything most of England would recognize. The language was older, rhythmic, the words her grandmother had taught her in a country she could never safely return to. Words meant for calming, for connection, for telling frightened creatures they were seen. The stallion's ears swiveled forward. Just slightly. The rumbling stopped. Mira kept speaking, her voice low and steady, each phrase carrying the particular cadence that transcended vocabulary. She told him she understood. Told him that surviving did not mean forgetting. Told him that trust, once shattered, took time to rebuild, but that rebuilding was still possible. Varden took one step closer to the bars, then another. When his nose finally pressed against the wood near her hand, it was not aggression. It was question. Mira lifted her palm slowly, letting him catch her scent. The stallion's nostrils flared. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, with devastating gentleness, he lowered his massive head until his forehead rested against the barrier between them. The sound Mira made was half sob, half breath. She reached through the bars with trembling fingers and touched the star-shaped marking between his eyes. I know, she whispered in that old, forgotten language. I know what it costs to keep fighting when everything hurts. That was when she heard the footsteps behind her. She turned sharply to find Duke Cashenhale standing in the stable entrance, still dressed for evening though it was well past midnight. His expression was unreadable in the shadows, but his eyes were fixed entirely on the scene before him. The stallion no one could approach, resting quiet, and still beneath the hand of a stable girl he did not even know by name. "What?" the Duke said slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Do you think you are doing?" Myra's hand remained steady against Varden's forehead, even as her heart slammed against her ribs, because pulling away now would betray the fragile trust she had just earned. The Duke stepped further into the stable, his movements controlled but radiating barely contained tension. Behind him, faint light from the main house spilled across frost-touched stone. "I asked you a question," he said, calming him, "Your Grace." Her voice came out quieter than intended, but did not shake. Cashin's eyes narrowed. 3 trained handlers cannot enter that stall without being attacked. Yet you stand there as though he is a garden pony. Varden shifted at the Duke's tone, ears flicking backward in warning. Mira murmured something soft in that unfamiliar language, and the stallion stilled again immediately. The Duke watched the exchange with an expression that moved from anger towards something far more unsettling, recognition. "What language is that?" Mira hesitated. "An old one, Your Grace. From the eastern regions." "You are not from the eastern regions." "No." She did not elaborate. Could not. Without unraveling carefully constructed safety. The Duke studied her with an intensity that suggested he saw through evasions as clearly as he saw through battlefield deceptions. "How long have you been coming here at night?" "This is the first time." His disbelief was palpable. "One conversation, and he trusts you." "Not trust, Your Grace." "Recognition." "Of what?" Mira met his gaze directly for the first time. "Of what it feels like to survive something that should have broken you." The words landed heavier than she intended. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, not softening exactly, but a crack in the armor he wore as deliberately as his title. For several seconds, neither spoke. Varden's breathing was the only sound, deep and steady now, so different from the violent panic that usually filled this corner of the stable. Finally, Cashin stepped closer, testing. Varden's head lifted sharply, eyes rolling white. Mira spoke again, quick and soothing, and the stallion held position, though every muscle trembled with the effort. "He remembers you," she said quietly. "That is the problem." The Duke's voice carried bitterness worn smooth by repetition. "He remembers everything. The artillery fire, the cavalry charges, horses screaming as they fell." He stopped, jaw tight. He should have been left behind. Bringing him here was cruelty disguised as sentiment, or hope disguised as duty. Cashin's gaze snapped to her. "You overstep." "Yes, Your Grace." Mira did not apologize, because apology would mean she believed the words were wrong rather than simply unwelcome. The Duke stared at her for a long moment, then back at Varden. "Can you help him?" The question was asked like a command, but beneath it Mira heard something raw and unguarded. The same desperation she had seen in broken creatures countless times before. Not just concern for the horse. Something deeper, more personal. "I can try," she said carefully. "But it will take time, and he will need to choose it." "Choose." "Trust cannot be forced, Your Grace. Not from those who have learned the cost of giving it." Another long silence. Then the Duke nodded once, sharply. "You will work with him. Report directly to me. Tell no one else what you are doing or why." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Ashton, Your Grace." "Mira Ashton." "Miss Ashton. If he injures you, the fault will be recorded as your own recklessness. I will not have this household questioning my judgment further." "Understood." After he left, Mira stood alone with Varden in the quiet dark, her hand still resting against the stallion's scarred face. She had survived by remaining invisible. Now she had stepped directly into the light, and into the attention of a man whose own wounds were written in every clipped word, every carefully maintained distance. But as Varden's breathing deepened into something almost peaceful, she understood that some risks were worth taking, some connections worth the danger they invited, even if they cost everything. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that existed outside the normal life of the estate. Mira rose before dawn and worked with Varden for 2 hours before her regular duties began. The Duke attended every session, silent and watchful, positioned where the stallion could not see him, but Mira always could. She never asked why he came. He never explained. Progress was slow, measured in breaths rather than milestones. The first week, Varden allowed her inside the stall. The second, he accepted a halter. By the third, she could run her hands along his scarred flanks while speaking that old, rhythmic language that seemed to reach past his fear into some quieter place beneath. The other grooms noticed, of course. Whispers followed Mira through the estate now, speculation about favoritism, about impropriety, about how a no-name stable girl had accomplished what trained professionals could not. She ignored them all, but the Duke did not. One morning, she arrived to find him in the stable before her, his expression thunderous. "There is talk," he said without preamble. Mira set down her brush carefully. "There is always talk, Your Grace. About you. About why you have access others are denied. And what would you have me do?" His frustration was palpable. "Be less visible. Less." He stopped, searching for words that would not reveal too much. "Less effective?" she finished quietly. "That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Your Grace?" The Duke looked at her with an expression she could not decipher, something caught between anger and something far more dangerous. "I mean that I cannot protect you from gossip I myself have created. I did not ask for protection." "No," he said softly. "You asked for nothing, which makes this worse." Before she could respond, Varden nickered softly from his stall. Not distress, breeding. The stallion had begun recognizing her footsteps, her voice, her presence. And recently, he had stopped flinching when the Duke stood nearby, as though Myra's calm had become a bridge between two damaged creatures who had forgotten how to reach each other. Cassian followed her gaze to the horse, and something in his expression finally cracked open. "He is healing," he said quietly. "Because of you." "He is healing because he chose to," Mira corrected. "I only gave him reason to try." The Duke looked at her then with an intensity that stole breath. "And what if he stopped, turned away sharply?" "Forgive me. That was inappropriate." But Mira had heard the unfinished question, had seen it in his eyes every morning for weeks now. The same question Varden had asked with his trust, the same one she had been too afraid to acknowledge. "What if I need the same thing?" The breaking point came during a storm that rolled across Blackmoor with the weight of memory behind it. Thunder cracked like artillery fire. Rain hammered the stable roof in rhythms too close to cavalry charges. And Varden, who had been improving steadily for weeks, shattered back into terror so complete that even Mira could not reach him. She tried everything. Her voice, her presence, the language that had always calmed him before. Nothing worked. The stallion screamed and threw himself against the stall with such violence that it splintered. Blood streaked his shoulders where he had torn through partially healed wounds. "Get out!" the head groom shouted over the chaos. "He'll kill you." But Mira could not leave him like this, could not abandon him to the nightmare consuming him. Then the Duke was there, forcing his way past the grooms. His face was pale, his hands shaking in a way Mira had never seen before. Because he was not just watching Varden break, he was living it with him. "Your Grace, you cannot." Cassian ignored her, moving toward the stall with the terrible certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome. Varden reared as he approached, hooves striking air inches from the Duke's head. Mira lunged forward without thinking, stepping between them. "Move," Cassian commanded. "No, that is an order." "Then court-martial me." She turned back to Varden, hands raised, and began speaking. Not the gentle words from before. Something different. Sharper. The language of survival, of soldiers who had seen too much, of creatures who understood that sometimes living through the night was victory enough. And slowly, impossibly, Varden began to hear her. His movements remained frantic but grew less wild. The screaming faded to ragged breathing. Mira stepped closer, close enough that one strike would end her, and pressed her palm against his sweat-soaked neck. "I know," she whispered in that old language, tears streaming down her face. "I know it feels like it will never stop. But you are here. Not there. Here. With those who understand." Behind her, she heard the Duke's breath catch. When she glanced back, his eyes were closed, his face turned upward as though her words had found their mark in him as surely as in the horse. The storm raged for another hour. But Varden did not break again. He stood trembling in the stall while Mira stayed with him, speaking softly, her hand never leaving his neck. And the Duke stayed too, silent and still, bearing witness to something he could not name but desperately needed to see. When dawn finally came gray and quiet, Mira was exhausted enough that she swayed on her feet. Cassian caught her elbow immediately, steadying her. "You should rest," he said. So should he. She gestured toward Varden, now standing with his head lowered in exhaustion. I meant you. The concern in his voice was too raw to be merely aristocratic obligation. Mira met his gaze and saw everything he had been trying not to say for weeks. Everything she had been trying not to feel. Your Grace. Cashin. He interrupted quietly. When we are alone, just... Cashin. That would not be appropriate. Nothing about this is appropriate. He released her arm, but did not step away. You saved his life tonight. Perhaps mine as well. I only reminded him he was not alone. Yes, Cashin said softly. You did. The weight of those words settled between them, heavy with meaning neither could safely acknowledge. But before either could speak again, the head groom appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, Lord Pemberton has arrived unexpectedly. He asks to see you immediately. Cashin's expression shuddered instantly back into ducal composure. Tell him I will attend shortly. He looked at Mira one last time. We will speak later. It was not a dismissal. It was a promise. Later came sooner than either expected. By midday, the entire estate knew that Lord Pemberton had come bearing marriage contracts and the expectation of a formal betrothal announcement. The woman was suitable, wealthy, connected to half the powerful families in England. Everything a duke's wife should be. Everything Mira was not. She learned this from the other grooms, who discussed it with the casual cruelty of those who had never considered her a threat. Why would they? She was no one. Nothing. A stable girl who had briefly caught the duke's attention through unusual skill with a damaged horse. That evening, she went to Varden's stall and found Cashin already there. He stood with his hand against the stallion's neck, and for the first time since she had known him, the horse did not pull away from his master's touch. He let you approach, Mira said softly. He has been learning, Cashin replied. From the best teacher. Silence filled the space between them, thick with everything unspoken. Finally, Cashin turned to face her fully. I am expected to announce my engagement within the month. Mira's chest tightened, but she nodded. I understand, Your Grace. Do you? His voice carried an edge of desperation. Because I have spent 6 weeks watching you heal a creature everyone else abandoned. Watching you speak truths no one else dared voice. Watching you become... He stopped, jaw tight. This would be simpler if I did not know you. If you were merely skilled rather than extraordinary. I am not extraordinary. I am a stable hand who speaks an old language. You are a woman who saw past my walls the same way you saw past his. He gestured toward Varden. And now I do not know how to return to the man I was before that. Mira's eyes burned. You are a duke. I am no one. That is the only truth that matters. It is not the only truth. Cashin stepped closer. But it may be the one that defeats us both. Before she could respond, Varden nickered softly and moved between them, pressing his nose against the duke's shoulder, then Mira's. The gesture was unmistakable. Recognition, connection, trust given freely because he had learned, finally, that not everyone who approached meant harm. Cashin stared at his war horse, and something in his expression shifted toward resolution. He chose healing, he said quietly, even when it seemed impossible. Yes. Then perhaps I can do the same. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Then the Duke of Blackmore did something that would scandalize every aristocrat in England. He took Mira's hand in his, not with possession, but with the careful reverence of someone handling something infinitely precious. I do not know how this resolves, he said, but I know I cannot choose a life that requires forgetting you. 3 months later, Blackmore Estate hosted the wedding everyone claimed could not happen. A duke and a stable girl, standing before witnesses who came more from curiosity than approval. But as Cashin and Mira spoke their vows, Varden stood in the courtyard beyond the chapel, calm and steady, living proof that broken things could heal if someone loved them enough to wait. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered.